Let's suppose you have a bank account in the USA, and you want to be able to access your bank account from wherever you are. Can you do it? The answer to this question seems obvious. Of course, if your bank provides online banking services, you should be able to access it without being physically present in the same country as the bank. But the reality seems different. I also have a bank account in the USA from the Bank of America, and I'm from Bangladesh. Every time I go visit Bangladesh and try to access my bank account from there, most of the time the page just doesn't load. And some of the time when it loads, it asks me to do something impossible to prove my humanness. It asks me to solve a CAPTCHA that I can't even see. So you might be wondering that why is this happening? One reason it could be happening is that Bangladesh blocking access to the Bank of America website or the reCAPTCHA services. Government blocking access to different websites is one of the most common form of blocking that we know at this point. But the kind of blocking I'm talking about is not happening at the country level. Here, instead of the country doing the blocking is happening outside the country where the websites is deciding who can access their site. For my case, it's not just Bank of America. Many of the other websites are also blocked from Bangladesh. Here, doodle.com shows this page that says that my access to Doodle is blocked because they are using a security service to protect itself from online attacks. I asked my friends who live all around Bangladesh, and none of them can access doodle.com from Bangladesh. So for somehow, the entire country is attacking doodle.com. And it's not just me not being able to access sites from Bangladesh. Other people have also experienced different kinds of blocking. Here again, Windsurf is complaining about not being able to access Verizon.com from overseas. So these type of barriers are commonplace, so much so that we may not even register them as extraordinary events. But these are reflective of how our current web does not actually provide universal access to information to everyone who wants it. And that brings me to the main point of this talk. The internet is going dark for many people around the world, but not because of the repressive government, because of the technical decisions of the well-meaning developers and website owners. My colleagues and I, we wanted to measure the extent our internet is fragmented along regional borders, how often you are unable to see some websites that are available from other people around the world. This is definitely not a new phenomenon. There's this term called fragmentation that's been talked about for a couple of years now, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. It talks about the ways in which our internet does not provide universal access to information to everyone. But what Windsurf and his colleagues wrote in their report to the World Economic Forum is that while we know that the internet is splintered because of a range of commercial, political, and technical reasons, we don't actually know how widespread these exclusionary practices are. And more importantly, we don't know how these blocking practices are affecting people's lives. Blocking is a key term here. We consider blocking to be the barrier that denies you access from the resource that you just requested. These barriers could be in the form of an error code that's shown here, or it also could be CAPTCHA that determines your ability to interact with the site. It could also be functional barriers where the site allows you to view the site but doesn't allow you to do anything else on it. There are some regional differences in websites due to localizations, but we don't consider them as blocking. The term regional is also self-explanatory. We are looking for the differences that fall along the regional lines. On a system like internet that's supposed to transcend space, how much does place actually matter? So how can we measure that the website is deliberately blocking access from a specific country? Doing this kind of measurement is not so simple for three main reasons. First of all, a network request from a client side has to pass through many different machines before it reaches the server. A failure in any of the machines in anywhere along the path could cause a website being inaccessible. So just because a website is unavailable from the client side, you can't tell who is responsible for this blocking. The second problem is any kind of scalable network measurements has to be done through automated crawlers. So sometimes when you're doing this kind of crawling, you might find a lot of blocking, but that's probably because the website is blocking your crawler as a bot, while the real access is completely possible. The third problem is, even if you successfully discover blocking, proving intent is difficult because some blocking might be happening without the websites knowing it. It might be happening because the website is using some other mechanisms for some other reasons. So with all these problems in mind, we designed a 3-step process to discover blocking. At first, we identify a list of websites that are available in some places but not all. As I mentioned before, a website might be unavailable for reasons other than regional blocking, for example, censorship, network failure, or temporary unavailability. We try to distinguish these factors by repeated measurements and traceroute. Through traceroute, we send a series of packets with different time to live and check how far the packet goes before we get a failed response. If we get a failed response before the packet crosses the country borders, we consider it as censorship. But if we get a failed response at the website, we consider it as regional blocking. So for our first step, we try to find a list of websites that are available in some locations, but not all. To find these websites, we send HTTP GET requests to a list of websites, once from the US and once from other countries. If the page loads in the US but doesn't load in other countries, then we consider that the website is doing some kind of server-side blocking. And the opposite is true, too, that the website loads in other countries but not in the US. That's also regional blocking. So far, we ran our measurements from 10 countries around the world, but in the rest of the talk, I will only talk about 5 of our measurements. We ran it from a couple of cities in the USA, 3 countries in Africa, 3 countries in Europe, Ukraine, Pakistan, and India. That's it, I think. We use different infrastructure for doing the scrolling. Wherever we can, we use local ISPs and VPNs because we wanted to make sure that the blocking we're experiencing are not because of our choice of infrastructure. We crawled 2 lists of URLs, over 85K URLs that are hosted on Cloudflare. I want to clarify here that we chose Cloudflare not because they do most of the blocking, but because whenever they do blocking, they provide a specific reason, something that we are very interested in understanding. We also crawled over 7K URLs of different topics because we wanted to understand whether blocking is concentrated on any specific topic. We found 4 reasons for regional discrimination: DNS errors, geo-blocking, abuse-based blocking, and other unspecified type of blocking. The DNS errors include blocking at the DNS level, which are mostly related to censorship. The main takeaway point from this graph is that all of our measurement locations experience some form of regional blocking, but the specific websites that do the blocking and the specific reasons for blocking are different for different countries. For example, our US locations was blocked mostly by Pakistani government websites. The UK locations was blocked because of unspecified reasons. Ukraine was blocked mostly because of security reasons. South Africa was blocked for mostly by shopping websites. And Pakistan was blocked mostly by websites that are hosted in India. So we found many different ways of regional blocking. Geo-blocking was the most transparent form of blocking that we found, where the website directly says that this website is not available in your country. This includes websites like JCPenney and Grubhub. The second form of blocking is security-motivated blocking, where the site says that the request is blocked because of security rules. But what do they mean by security, and how are they implementing it is unclear from a user's point of view. Here again, every country received some form of security-motivated blocking. Ukraine and Pakistan were the mostly blocked countries due to security reasons. One interesting thing we noticed while we were looking at this security notices that it seems websites do have different rules for different countries. For example, our visits from Ukraine was getting blocked because one of the vantage points from Ukraine was a VPN. But other vantage points in other countries were also VPN, but they never got this error. Another interesting fact we noticed is that just looking at the patterns of blocking, it's hard to conclude what mechanisms this website are using for blocking and why they're doing the blocking. For example, there are some websites like Publix.com that blocks all countries except the US. So you can imagine that they're probably whitelisting the US. Then there are some countries like Williams-Sonoma that blocks most of the African countries. So you can imagine that maybe they're using some kind of blacklisting. Then there are countries in the between. For example, Safeway.com blocks all countries except the US and India. It's probably because their development team is in India. One Indian government websites block all countries except the USA, UK, and India. So you can see there's a lot of variation there. We started our measurements right before GDPR became enforceable. And once GDPR became enforceable, we started seeing a lot of block pages from the EU locations. So we measured how many websites are blocking the EU locations to avoid GDPR compliance. For this, we counted the number of websites that were available from the US before and after GDPR became enforceable, but unavailable from EU locations. We crawled about 7K URLs, once from the US and once from 3 EU countries, Bulgaria, Germany, and UK. So overall, we noticed that GDPR caused about 1% of the blocking. 74 websites in our block list blocked all the EU locations due to GDPR. Surprisingly, all of these are local newspaper websites. And this is an interesting finding because blocking newspaper websites is a very common government tactic due to government censorship. But here, instead of the government doing the blocking, the newspaper sites are deciding who can view them. We also noticed some kind of blocking where it's completely vague why the blocking is happening, and they don't provide you enough information. For example, Yelp just says, you cannot access this page. We are still trying to figure out the true extent of this blocking because we suspect that it's more common than the scans have revealed. One of the ways we're doing this is coming up with the issue from top down and bottom up. By this I mean we are running these quantitative measurements. We are also talking to people who are experiencing blocking and webmasters who do this kind of blocking to figure out the qualitative perspectives on this issue. One of the groups we have talked to so far are webmasters and security professionals, for whom security is a key motivator for blocking. What we have learned so far from these interviews is an intuitive explanation. Many companies serve only a targeted, regionally bound audience, so they see no reason to show their websites to users who they cannot serve anyway. So they will choose to block all IP addresses from countries that they consider as suspect as an additional layer of security. So this might seem consequential. This might not seem consequential, but you may lose a lot of users if you're trying to run an international websites. The example I like to give here is one of the initial experiences that motivated this research. One of our colleagues, Jenna Burrell, was doing field work in Ghana on youth internet usage. And she found that many of them use the website Plenty of Fish to socialize outside Ghana and to practice their English. In Ghanaian culture, asking for money and gifts from your dates is a very common practice. But when the Ghanaians started doing this in a site like Plenty of Fish, other users complained about fraud coming from Ghana. And as a result, Plenty of Fish decided to block the entire country. So you can see that for a company like Plenty of Fish, it's always a trade-off between security of their users. So if you want to give security to some users, the site might not be accessible for other users. Since Jenna's fieldwork in Ghana, CDNs and other intermediaries have emerged as an important actor that oversee website availability. Companies like Cloudflare made it easier to block countries by IP address range. So this is a tool that Cloudflare gives you if you want to block a country by IP addresses. I'm not going to call out Cloudflare here because they said this is a service they provide because there's a very high demand from their customers for a service like this. Maybe because this is so easy, we have learned that many people blocked countries without even knowing that they're blocking countries. We talked to one interviewee who said that he just chose the high security toggle from Cloudflare, but didn't realize that it blocked almost all of Tor exit nodes. Other intermediaries like Google reCAPTCHA serve as gatekeeper to sites, often using heuristics that are opaque to users. The difficulty of the CAPTCHA you see depends on your IP reputation that takes your location into measure. So this is problematic for countries like Bangladesh, where you have a lot of users and very few IP addresses. In that case, you might be reusing an IP address that was already used in some malicious activities. In my case, I checked my IP address for Bangladesh in the public blacklist, and I found it in 11 public blacklists. So perhaps there are other economic factors here too. Some interviews said that they are unlikely to serve users from countries where they have very poor internet infrastructure, because serving those countries might cost them more money. This is the cost of bandwidth of one CDN, Fastly. Here you can see that if you want to serve Brazilian customers, you have to pay twice as much than if you want to serve North American customers. We only began some user interviews, but so far, those who have volunteered to share their experience often tend to use very strong languages evoking physical borders. For example, the Macy's website is blocked in Malaysia. So this user was talking to Macy's on Twitter and asking them, why am I blocked from Malaysia? And Macy's said, oh, it's because we don't ship to Malaysia. And then the user said, but I wasn't planning to ship to Malaysia. I was planning to ship to my US address from Malaysia. And Macy's didn't say anything. So while talking about this blocking, the user also mentioned the wall. Maybe Macy's would like to build a wall too. So how can we make the web more accessible? I don't have a clear answer to this very complicated question. Defending against abuse and attacks is a real and hard problem that the internet companies are facing right now. But looking at the other side of the problem is also important, because abuse mitigation might make it harder for real users to use the internet who rely on the internet for their day-to-day life. But we do have some recommendation that we can start looking into. We need to revisit the systems that use IP addresses to decide who to provide access to, because an IP address does not mean one person in many places around the world, especially in the developing countries where a large number of users are behind carrier-grade NATs. So IP address-based blocking might cause you to block way more users than you are intending to do. If you are running on international websites, don't just assume it's going to work from everywhere. Test to make sure that you are not inadvertently blocking more users than you want. If you are planning to block users, provide useful and actionable information, and if possible, provide ways to bypass the blocking. I think most of us in this room didn't have a chance to decide physical country borders, but all of us have some power to decide borders on the internet, especially for the websites that we control. So we need to think about what kind of internet do we want to see in the future. An internet that functionally acts as a local lemonade stand, or the one without artificial borders that provide equal access to information for everyone. Thank you.